Free testosterone went from 27.8, so again, pretty low. And that also pretty much doubled and landed at 58.7 over the course of this experiment. So my total testosterone effectively doubled, my free testosterone effectively doubled, and all of my lipid markers improved. Let's dive into it. I decided to, again, take my maintenance intake, which was about 3,000 calories, and then be very aggressive with the increase. So I decided to make my new intake 4,000 calories. So an additional 1,000 calories above baseline. And I was targeting nearly a 4-to-1 ratio, 4-to-1 being defined as carbohydrates plus protein in grams, times 4 is how much fat you need to consume to have that 4-to-1 ratio. I think Nick was doing it based off of net carbs and not total carbs. So I was following a similar protocol. So I was a little shy of a true 4-to-1, but the study that was done in the Nature Metabolism magazine or article basically had protein at 9% or less of total calories for the day. So every day throughout this experiment, I targeted 9% or fewer calories from protein as a percentage of total caloric intake for the day, which for me wound up being around 400 grams of fat, 75 to 85 grams of protein a day, and depending on what I was consuming, 30 to 50 grams of total carbohydrates for the day typically. I was using a lot more like cauliflower rice to soak up oils and stuff. So to kind of illustrate what a typical day of eating for me was over this 2-week span, I would wake up, I'd have, a tablespoon of ghee in my coffee along with some heavy cream. On this particular day, I had some of that, what's that stuff called? It's like the mascarpone cheese, peanut butter, macadamia nuts, a keto brick or two, more ghee, and then more macadamia nuts. And then for dinner, the big hack that I had to hit this high fat intake was I would have a can of cod liver, which is pretty much 500 calories primarily coming from fat. There would still be the liver in there. I'd have that. I'd have that soaking up with a bunch of cauliflower rice. Usually I was doing 200 to 300 grams of that a day. I put some Primal Kitchen dipping sauce in there to increase the fat. Cook a few eggs in there with it, with 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of ghee to pretty much hit that target intake. This day, for instance, my intake was 4,053 calories, and that was 86.6 grams of protein, 62 grams of carbs. That may have been the highest carb day, most of which is coming from the fiber in the cauliflower rice, and then 391 grams of fat. So pretty significant increase in dietary fat. Normally, I'm consuming around 200 to 250 grams of fat, and most often with this, I was around 400 grams of fat. Going into it, I thought I was going to have a ton of GI distress, but honestly, I had zero GI distress. I had no loose stool. That was honestly one of the biggest surprises. I had no GI
I was going to
issues.
ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty smooth sailing.
That's a little bit of a shock to your normal.
Yeah, definitely a higher increase in fat and very little protein relative to my normal consumption. So that's what a typical day of eating looked like throughout this 2-week span. And then if we look at my other chronometer data here from a visual standpoint, just to kind of give y'all some context, this period here was where I was actually in that quote unquote mini cut. And then I had a few refeed ad libitum days. I fasted one day. That's what that was. I actually did not track these 2 days, but that was probably 2 5,000 calorie days. So a pretty high intake to kind of just eat whatever I wanted to for that span, which basically defeats the purpose of having a lead in a week. But, I'm a human, not a mouse. So this span here, I started the experiment on June 9th. And I went until the 23rd of June. So pretty much consuming around 4,000 calories that entire span. And then that's what I'm looking like there. And if we look at my weight over that span as well, after those 2 5,000 calorie days and kind of ad libitum eating, my weight did jump up quite a bit, which I would have expected. I think I went from 176 at my lowest during that mini cut. I don't even like the word that I'm using, mini cut, but people understand that. And then after having a week of consuming more food and 2 pretty high caloric intake days, my weight jumped to 183.2. All right. And then I started the experiment on the 9th at a weight of 183.2. So that's where the 4,000 calories basically started. There's a little bit of a discrepancy there because, again, I was eating less, ate a whole lot more, and then my weight jumped up largely from water retention from eating more, saltier foods, things like that. But over that span, while eating 4,000 calories, my weights had a little bit of an increase in the first few days, and then you can see it just steadily dropping throughout the time of the experiment. I believe on the last day of the experiment, June 23rd, my weight was 179.2. So pretty much flushed out that water and then dropped to just right above where I was. But just keep in mind, here I'm eating 4,000 calories, whereas before I was eating 2,500 calories. So pretty impressive from a weight standpoint there. For all intents and purposes, it was holding stable or dropping relative to what I would be at baseline intake of 3,000 calories. Now, if we look at my AI dashboard of this experiment to do a little bit more of a deep dive here, you can see just that span of time. And I am, again, starting the experiment at about 183 on 6/9. And then you can kind of see the trend line holding pretty stable or actually taking a dip there towards the end. So, pretty impressive trend line while eating significantly more food. And here you can see my protein consumption throughout the whole time at about 9% of total calories. Carbs were at about 6% of total calories. And then fat was typically around 85 to 87% of total calories coming from fat throughout that experiment. And then over the course of that span, my average caloric intake was 4,100, 4,100, 3,986. So pretty much right there around 4,000 calories. Now, I decided to get blood work both. When did I got the first lab on the 25th, I believe. So a little bit in the middle of that intermediary week. And then again on the last day of the experiment. I anticipated a significant increase in my lipid panel, triglycerides, cholesterol.
Sure.
I was kind of expecting that since I had so much more fat coming in relative to my baseline. Now, I am very deeply fat adapted, but I assumed with this much fat intake over baseline, I would see those numbers increase. But when I actually got the lab markers, I saw a very different outlook. So let's go to the lab results here. Greg, you're kind of in a cut right now. Does 4,000 calories of pure fat sound appealing?
Nice.
Or not?
I would not complain about that. That'd be nice.
All right, so look at these two panels. This is basically when I got my first draw at 529, and then again on the last day of the experiment on 623. My total cholesterol went from 274 to 276, so not much of a change there. HDL cholesterol went from 91 to 106, so not a significant change there, but HDL actually improved. LDL went from 165 to 155, so LDL dropped. Triglycerides went from 77 to 57, so I thought that was a little interesting. There's a whole bunch of markers here. HDL ratio went from 3 to 2.6. Triglyceride to HDL ratio went from 0.85 to 0.54. So pretty much for all intents and purposes, an improvement in lipid markers. My ApoB A1 ratio stayed steady at 0.53. Glucose is consistent 91 both times. Let me just scroll down here. The main thing I want to talk about is the hormones, because this one really surprised me, shocked me.
You were telling us about that.
So let's see if I could scroll down to find that. So just to kind of give people some context, I've never had super high testosterone. That's why, Greg, one of the funny things, people always accuse me of taking steroids.
Yeah, right. Or TRT or anything.
Yeah, but like I get on my lab work, and I think when I was at 3.9% in my prep, I hit like 86 or 87 as total testosterone. So obviously not taking gear. But yeah, I've never been one to have super high testosterone. Typically, I'm around like 400 to 600 is pretty average for me. But when I go down to hormones, my total testosterone serum at the time of the experiment starting was 334 total testosterone. So not that great. After the experiment was over, it more than doubled and went to 696.
That's crazy.
So it literally more than doubled in that span while eating minimal protein and significantly high dietary fat. My sex hormone binding globulin did increase a little bit. So it went from 60 to 87. So that's not great. But if I could have found a way to unbind some of that testosterone, my free testosterone would be even higher. And then for some reason on Heads Up Health here, my free testosterone is not showing, but I have that as well. Let me sign in. I guess it must have logged me out. Say something, Greg.
That's pretty wild. Were you expecting it to go in any certain direction, or were you kind of just open-minded?
Yeah, I honestly didn't really expect any change in hormones, especially over such a short time span. But yeah,
that's a pretty significant change too. That's just not like a questionable little bit of a variation. That's a notable amount.
So here we've got IGF-1, and that went from, let's see here, it's 81 now. If I look at over-time, so my IGF-1 went from 107 to 81. So that one actually dropped a little bit. Estradiol, that went from 8 to 22. So that one increased. Cortisol, interesting marker there. That one actually dropped a little bit. It went from 12.4 to 9.9. Insulin. See, a lot of the reasons people were doing this is to improve insulin sensitivity.
Sure. My
insulin went from, that's all the way back in May. I guess I didn't get insulin tested the first time, but it ended at 2.5. And then let's see here.
There's your free test.
Yeah, free test. All right, so my free testosterone, which is the one that really matters, went from, that's total. Free testosterone went from 27.8, so again, pretty low. And that also pretty much doubled and landed at 58.7 over the course of this experiment. So my total testosterone effectively doubled, my free testosterone effectively doubled, and all of my lipid markers improved while eating 1,000 extra calories. A ton of fat, and less than 9% of my calories coming from protein.
And no protein.
So super interesting there.